They just feel that we are not aware. And for them to be aware, to go to this next level with them, you'd have to be aware of yourself, your whole planet, your whole system, and everything about it, and aware that there are other civilizations in the galactic, and have contact with them and understand what the whole galactic is about. They would show us things that we can relate to, things that we can easily understand, and things that would be meaningful to us. And apparently there's some sort of training areas. They haven't elaborated on all of them yet, and they're not forthcoming on all of them yet. And I don't know if they're going to give us a detailed explanation on all the known jump areas, or even the remnants of the moon and Mars.
Bernie, what were your observations as to the role of the gray extraterrestrials in the 1980 to 83 jump room program?
That's a very good question. I think it changed as due course of events and as time went on. From the original project, before I was trained and brought onto the project, there were only minor observances of grays in the areas of the prior jump room experiments. It was really experimental at the time, and no one at that time knew. Well, we didn't have all the grays categorized at that time, but we were very close to categorizing all the different types of grays. I think we're up to like K-type or another peculiar type, a long neck gray, and a couple of different types of grays. And then as time progressed, there were more and more sightings of grays during the jumps. Either on the East Coast at night, we saw them scampering around, or as Andrew mentioned, he saw it on top of the jump room after we made the jump, or other observances after the jump when we were reconning the area. And then as time went on, we had more and more contact with the grays, and they began talking to us. So the perception of the grays at the time when I started was that they were around. They seemed to be more prevalent than the other types of aliens. But looking back in retrospect, apparently the grays are some kind of super race of intellectual or intellects, as the other aliens phrase them, who are caretakers of a great many things and solve a great many problems in this peculiar galaxy we live in. As to how many types of grays there are, I don't know. I do know at the time we probably had about, I think, 8 or 10 types, and then now it's probably well into 200 or so. And then overall, types of aliens, when I started, it was like 240 something, and now it's, last time I checked, it was 420 something, maybe as much as 600 something known types of aliens. So the grays would be more of a dominant type, because during negotiations with the aliens themselves and the grays, we asked about the grays, like with the Nordic types, and they said the grays are the greatest intellects in the known galactic, and that they help a lot of other civilizations, and that they solve a lot of problems. There were instructions that I was given for the DOT secretary, and usually another secretary, plus members of the general staff, and there were a lot of questions when I we sat down and actually spoke with them. It was at a classified location. One time was not far from the Pentagon. And I would say that was kind of like a turning point, because now they were starting to answer our questions immediately. Whereas prior to that, they were answering questions based on the visitations to the different areas, but it took at least 6 months, maybe a year or so, before that we got responses. So now, for some reason, they were becoming chatterboxes. We didn't know what the reason was. There was a lot going on at that time, besides jump room activities, a lot of UFO sightings, and now the negotiations began. And they began answering our questions. So we had made several requests. One of them in particular I recall was that we wanted to know the history of this galaxy, the history of this planet, its peoples, what our origins were from, and an explanation for our solar system, and an explanation for why there's so many pyramids on this planet. So we go back in time on this planet, basically pyramids dominated the landscape, and an explanation for the dinosaurs, what happened to them. So we have extinction events, and what happened to the civilizations in Egypt. There ain't that many buried bodies that were found there. Same thing with the Mayans. There's a lot of other cultures too that we covered. I'm pretty sure I covered just about all of them. And they said that. And then later we found out what they were doing. They have a very intricate communication system, and it's kind of like a mailbox system where they have nodes all over the galaxy and in between the galaxies and in the other galaxies, where if a ship stops by, you can upload and download information. A lot of it's personal information. And this is by their own treaties and by mutual respect and consideration, that a ship would go by one of these large nodes, and we have a description of one of them someplace, and download information, including personal information like personal phone calls or flash messages, and then upload information. And they go from node to node, and that's how basically the information travels. They don't like sending out signals too much, because if everyone sent out signals, there'd be signals bouncing off all the different civilizations, and it was causing a lot of confusion. So they try not to send out signals, and they try to go through this elaborate messaging system. So the message did go out immediately. I said within 6 months we got a response, and apparently someone known as Miss Ducky, we had all these peculiar phrases like jump rooms. I never used it before that. Mr. Gray, and I'm trying to remember, Mr. Green, a whole bunch of other things that we used to try and not particularly mention specifics, but to talk around things, especially when we had casual conversations. So apparently responded, claiming that she was a historian who was studying this area and knew a great deal about the history of this area, because that was her specialty. Although she was more than an historian, she was like a historian, anthropologist, and she would eventually give us an explanation for what she termed as the pyramidical, that the pyramids actually came from another galaxy, because we're on the edge of this galaxy, and because there was an opening for a planet like this, they began homesteading and building pyramids. The pyramid being set up kind of like an icon, kind of like a symbol, and that says this type of pyramid belongs to this type of civilization. Kind of like leaving your name and address, but in a pyramid form. He said many things were pyramidical. There are many types of buildings that are pyramidical. And there were many other questions asked besides all this historical questions. We asked how many civilizations were advanced civilizations. And that question over the years, besides this elaborate formula we have for advanced civilizations now, got very more technical. For instance, they began asking questions years down the road, like, what would you consider advanced? If you consider an advanced civilization capable of traveling from planet to planet, because there are a lot of civilizations that travel from planet to planet, but never leave their system. So like kind of us going back and forth to the moon or to Mars, but never go beyond that. There's a lot of isolationists that don't want to really get involved in the rest of the galaxy or the rest of the known civilizations out there for some peculiar reason. Or would you consider an advanced civilization someone that does go beyond their solar system? And that was a question. Or what if the civilizations in 2 or 3 systems? Is that one advanced civilization to you? Or is that 3 advanced civilizations? Or what if there's a combination thereof? Or other civilizations, mixed in the system? So I think they're still debating this as to what is an advanced civilization, what is it. But they have a way about them, and they did give us an explanation that, and they just feel that we are not aware. And for them to be aware, to go to this next level with them, you'd have to be aware of yourself, your whole planet, your whole system, and everything about it, and aware that there are other civilizations in the galactic, and have contacted them and understand what the whole galactic is about. And if you're not aware of all these things, and there's about 100 things you have to be fully aware of, you can't get 91 and be aware, or 92, but you can get like 97 maybe, or 95 maybe, they'll classify you as aware. And then you can proceed like to a next level of understanding of the galactic. There were military concerns, which were a priority in the beginning. Whether they had any plans to colonize the planet. Technically speaking, would it be possible for them to understand not to approach certain areas? Because we see the UFOs in certain classified areas. We don't want them there. And what would we do if they did approach these areas? How would we communicate with them not to stay away? And then on the counter side, they said, well, how come you don't post a sign saying not to go to these areas? Or send a signal out saying to stay away from these areas. And that was another issue. Beyond that, there were issues basically of what they did in their daily lives, or how we can assist them, or what their needs were, and as to why they kept coming here. And we got an explanation partially. They've been coming here for a very long time. They monitor a great many things, between 1 and 3 million things. They take a lot of surveys, and they check up on a lot of biology, mainly. Biology in the ocean, and biology on the land, and biology with all the species on the planet. And then we got into this whole abduction. I think the Benny and Bonnie Hill case was mentioned. Why did you abduct these 2 people? Apparently, they were, according to their explanation, they had been seen in that peculiar ship of theirs in the Benny and Bonnie Hill case, going up and down that highway that Benny and Bonnie Hill frequently traveled. The local military base picked them up on radar once or twice. There were some visual sightings prior to the Benny and Bonnie Hill case, once or twice, but nobody knew what to make of it. But they used to go down the roadway, or alongside of the roadway, back and forth continually for periods of time. And apparently the Hills went by a few times, and they had placed them under surveillance. And one point they decided to abduct them and to give them a medical exam, because they felt they were 2 different kinds of species that were mating, and they got very curious about it. They've never seen this before. And that was their explanation. It's a little more elaborate than that, but I'm not going to go into all these peculiar details of how they view biology and all the things that go on this planet. They have a very peculiar way of looking at us. And that was another issue, which led down a road to TV transmissions. Now, they picked up a lot of signals. That's what they were telling us, and they wanted an explanation for them. And we glossed over it at first, but then we started trying to get more specific. The problem is they would have to show us their recording devices, and then they were trying to verbally explain the signals, and it couldn't be done. And what it boiled down to, they had some radio signals, mainly, and then at some point they weren't quite forthcoming. They had a lot of TV signals. I think that's why they opened up negotiations. Apparently there was a dispute going on about all the TV signals they received and as to what they all meant. Because we have, at the time, the TV carrier waves, one signal was the visual carrier, and there was a second signal that was the audio carrier on your TV. And then you break for commercials, and that's a separate signal. And then it reverts back, to whatever movie or program you're watching, besides the news reports. And this was all very confusing to them. They really didn't understand what the TV was. And from negotiating with them, eventually they were able to allow us to board the ship and to show us on their, kind of like a flat screen TV, what they were looking at. They actually had a TV. We actually gave them a TV. And they actually rigged it somehow to show the TV signals later on, because they didn't really like us going aboard the ship. And eventually we reviewed a lot of signals, a lot of TV shows with them, trying to explain what it was. Now that was a good thing, okay? It was, and at the end of the day, it was a good day. We explained a lot of things to them. But on the rebound, they had a lot of questions. And what the conclusion they came to is that we are fantasizing a great deal, because TV is basically fantasy, fiction. It's not a fact. And a lot of TV transmissions are all fantasy, and they could not comprehend this. They could not comprehend comedy or satire. I don't think that registered with them at all. And they couldn't understand why we were continually sending signals like this. And they wanted to know what we were going to do about it, saying to us that this is causing a disturbance someplace, and that we should stop sending all these signals out into space. And it was very difficult to explain to them we didn't mean for these transmissions to be sent out in space, or didn't even have knowledge that it was sent out in space, and that other civilizations would be picking up these transmissions, including passerbys, that people who pass by this area of space pick up these transmissions and then go further into the galaxy and decode them and start discussing them, and that they got it all wrong. And how they were very mad about it. They said, how are we going to explain to everyone that all the transmissions we receive from your planet are wrong, that they're all fantasy, and that they're not to be taken seriously, because we've already disseminated all this information amongst a great many civilizations. He said, it will take us at least 10 years to communicate this contamination or this violation to all these civilizations. And we don't know if we can repair the damage. And why don't you, when you send out these signals, put a statement in there that this is a fantasy signal and this is not a fact. I think there's disclaimers now, viewer discretion advised. There's a lot of things like that going on over the years. Well, we all were taken aback by this. There's 3-4 teams going out 24 hours a day with them. So they just don't stop. And I think that's where I left it, pretty much. And we tried to explain to them that when we were transmitting, we didn't mean, or we didn't realize it would ever reach another civilization, and that it would ever be misinterpreted. And then they had a lot to say technically about the transmissions, that it was repetitive, like, because we show repeated movies sometimes over and over again, older movies. Why were we repeating things? Is that important? If you repeat something to them, it's very important. So we're always repeating things on the TV. And they appear to be very violent. There was a lot of violence on TV. Even different, besides the war movies, or even the dramas where people are fighting or yelling at one another or touching one another, or other sexual encounters where we would consider someone making love, they would consider violence because one species is dominating another species. So they consider us very, very violent. And at some point I quit. I actually went home. I said, I'm not going to try and explain all this to them. Another team came in and began discussing all this with them. And, but they were very, very interested in our explanation for it all. And I think they had recorded these discussions that we had, either at the areas or aboard their ship. Usually we weren't aboard their ship too long, just enough that they would show us around and that they were very serious about this, and that they showed us that they did have transmissions, like on some kind of peculiar flat screen TV, and that there were some other different types of space aliens aboard there too, who were also there, I think, as a show of force, showing us that, you know, we're other space aliens, but we are also concerned with what they're talking about. But it's mainly the Greys talking. We also began an exchange program. That's where the exchange program started. And they agreed to learn our language, English, basically. And I think they had questions about the UN, about our form of government, exactly. They had very peculiar questions. Like, how do we tell who your leaders are? How does one determine who your leaders are, they said. Like, and they mentioned certain political leaders. I'm not going to mention names, but it says, even though this person to you is your leader, he's not a leader to us. Why, if he was a leader, why wouldn't he be here talking to us right now? You know, because of the security constraints. Certainly, a high-ranking official, public official especially, is not going to go meet with them and talk with them. It's not going to happen. We were considering two-way video conferencing, but they didn't even think that was a good idea. Although I think it was done in a couple administrations later. Somebody was doing two-way video conferencing. It was being worked on. And that's right off the top of my head. I mean, that went on for days at a time, if not weeks. Then we took some breaks, and I was asked questions from time to time, what I thought about this or that. It was a very draining experience. It was very intense. I'd done negotiations before, but this was probably the most intense negotiations I've ever had. There were a lot of national security questions that were asked, like how advanced is this civilization? How many ships do they have? What is their population? Census like, and what are their military capabilities? What are their intentions as far as military concerns? And there were a great many questions asked about that. I wasn't privy to all of them, and I pretty much, everyone pretty much gets the idea what was going on with that. Then at some point, the tension snapped, and we turned to lighter subjects like, what do you eat? The air you breathe. We have pollution problems. Could you do anything about that? This different species problem, these abduction scenarios, what are they about? Are you just checking biology? Are you interested in hybriding species? Things along those lines. And then they said they couldn't answer some of the questions right away, but they would eventually. they begin, I know they got an encyclopedia set, besides the dictionary of the Rosses. Some other historical books. I know I signed some of them. Some others may have signed some of them. They got really curious about that language. And then we went to they wanted to know how we store information, which was a big dispute as to how much we should tell them. But I said, well, this is all public information that we can get out of a library. Let's just give it to them and see what happens. What could hurt? They were very curious as to how we store information. I said, the best way you could learn that, and this was a big dispute about this too, is to read our books, learn our language, read our books, and then you can get a sense of how we organize information. Like in the newspaper, the way you read it, you got the headline, and then you got, after that, the facts, and then a little synopsis, and then a conclusion, just for argument's sake. That didn't really make much sense to them. And they have quite an attention span. Because I remember picking up, the other guys asked me to go fill in for them, which I was reluctant to do, but I did anyway. And they seemed to be able to pick up a conversation that we had weeks before, recalling every detail and reviewing it all over again. Kind of like recapping from the beginning of the conversation you had weeks before. And they can't seem to understand why we have a problem with this. And they seem to think that our problem is that we can't recap the conversation word for word that you had weeks before, giving all the details of that conversation. Specifically, my aforementioned matters, the matters I just relayed to you right now, in detail, from the beginning, with them. And they didn't think we had a very good way of storing information and what they call recordings. That covers everything: radio, TV, books, media, the whole media. Oh, we had a very good way of they really didn't like summarizations or conclusions right away.
You've mentioned that as a result of your investigations, you began to discover, for example, that certain destinations, that the jump room, the Western jump room, supposed they were supposed to be going to Mars, and yet you went on one jump room with your colleague Andy Basiago and another member, Barry, who Andy has identified as Barry Soetoro, who's now the 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama, and he fired a flare which went up about 60 feet and hit a ceiling. And then others explored and came up against sort of a plexiglass-like or lucite-like sort of boundary, as though you're inside an enclosure. And that there are about 150 or so of these
slots.
Yeah, slots, or the term is, another term is synthetic quantum environment, SQE. Now, so, and that, so that's kind of, you know, what we see as some of the findings that have come out of there. Now, why do you suppose, having had all of these interactions with the Greys, that they went to these elaborate ends of constructing these artificial destinations, like maybe the assassination of Abraham Lincoln at Ford's Theater, or other historical ends, or maybe a reconstruction of the planet Mars at some point. Why did they do that? What's their purpose in having done this?
That matter is as far as I can tell, was under negotiations with them. They never actually was forthcoming as to all these different slots, but apparently they did agree to show us around to a degree. Degree being that they would show us things that we could relate to, things that we can easily understand, and things that would be meaningful to us. And apparently there's some sort of training areas. They haven't elaborated on all of them yet, and they're not forthcoming on all of them yet. And I don't know if they're going to give us a detailed explanation on all the known jump areas, or even the remnants of the Moon and Mars. They do give us sometimes a general synopsis, which is what we requested, that there was some kind of catastrophe, that's what's left, they're preserving things, they're moving things around, and they're training. As far as we know, these are some kind of training areas.
So that it was some kind of solar system catastrophe in the past.
Correct.
And the Greys have constructed these quantum environments of maybe historical
references
references as training areas, say, or to bring humanity through. Is that?
Eventually they want to raise our consciousness to a higher level of understanding as to what these areas are.
Yeah.
But there's a big debate as to whether or not we're capable of doing that yet.
I see.
There's a debate amongst them. Some of us apparently are capable of doing this. Others are not. We are not capable of accepting all that goes with it. It brings your concept of history and the understanding of the galaxy to a new level of understanding. So what we've known so far is not, as what's termed then, technically correct. We got it wrong, in other words. And they want to see that we're capable of reasoning at their level, whatever that is, or has yet to be determined what their reasoning is. And when we do, then perhaps we can go see more of what this area of space is all about, these slots are all about, what the planet Moon is like, or the second planet Moon, or Mars, what's on the surface, what's below the surface.
Yeah. By your understanding now, if we take the planet Mars, the actual planet Mars, is it your understanding that the U.S. has bases on Mars now?
It's been said they do. I don't know that for a fact. If they do, I would love to see them. I wouldn't doubt that it could be done. I couldn't see how they could cover something up that big. If you're actually on Mars, certainly a lot of people would know about it. I don't know what more to say about that.
Right, but what you're saying is that the specific technology that was given in the jump room, that jump room technology was developed by the Greys, is that correct?
I believe there was some kind of understanding between us and these extraterrestrials that developed this jump room technology, because I could not determine what this technology was.
Right.
And I was pretty good at what I did.
And
I couldn't even find anybody who could explain what this technology was.
Right. And so when you landed at the 1980 summer course at the College of the Siskiyou, how was it that Major Ed Daines, who you knew, right?
Yes.
How was it that he had the information where he said that you're going to be sent to Mars, and that we've sent 97,000 people to Mars.
That was the figure of speech as far as I knew. He didn't say, I said, well, is it actually in fact Mars? He says, well, we just say Mars. Just as this is a saying, because we don't really know where it is.
He actually said that.
That's correct.
In the class.
That's correct. He didn't say it maybe privately, he didn't say it in front of everybody. But
he said that privately to you.
That's correct.
At the time of the class.
I was outside the room. I was actually talking to him alone in the room, in the classroom, and then, because I was early. I ended up in California a little bit ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
And I asked around, I found James, he knew it was coming. That's all he knew.
Yeah.
And then we were talking about this.
Right.
And I even asked him, what do you think it is? He says, well, we don't know. I says, well, are we going to determine where it is? And then the rest of the individuals came in, and we started talking.
Yeah.
But the whole matter was classified.
It was classified. And did you and he ever have a chance to follow up on that conversation?
Well, when I went back to the administration and filed my reports, and this whole discussion about Mars came up, they said, well, it's good for morale. People think they're going to another planet. I said, well, where in the hell is it to begin with? And it says, well, we didn't know. It says, well, can I formulate a plan to try and figure out where we're jumping to? And I think the plan was inevitably approved. There are a lot of things in the works, maybe anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
So between the astronauts being brought into the jump rooms and then eventually the Fermi team and astrophysicists, they formulated a plan to determine where this was.
And so did that plan ever come to a conclusion?
The plan was executed.
Yeah.
We brought homing devices into the room. The astronauts mentioned to go ahead and bring like time capsules or some unique item that you would place conspicuously, and some items you would place inconspicuously in places that couldn't easily be duplicated, so that if someone actually did go to Mars and they found these items, they would know that, hey, the jump room personnel were here at this time, and that these were recorded items logged in someplace, and that if someone ever finds them, it's kind of having like a lost and found tag, it found, please return to, that sort of thing. It was getting very elaborate, but at some point. But
so that
there were there were other methods too. We brought, the Apollo program had some homing devices. They were large domes, valued about 80 to 120 pounds. You could roll it in the sand, and they would, upon command, they would send out a squawk a signal, and intermittently they would squawk a signal and flash a light. I think they were good for about 2 to 5 years, depending, battery operated. And we moved a lot of them around. In fact, I was just talking to an individual not too long ago about what happened with them. So I don't know how many of them are planted. I planted at least 3 myself. I think there may have been as many as 40 to 80 of them planted throughout the jump rooms. And signals did go off intermittently about 6 months later down the road from when I first planted the first one. And as to what rest of this happened, well, it became very confusing. Intermittent signals coming from space, coming from land, coming from other areas that didn't make sense. So it's kind of like saying we made a jump and we're getting a signal from the Eiffel Tower for some reason. I don't think we jumped to the Eiffel Tower. And that sort of thing was going on.
So that describes the process. Has there been, to your knowledge, a conclusion that has said we were jumping to X, Y, and Z?
To my knowledge, there's not been a conclusion. I think there's been a change in policy that we weren't going to slash and burn, but we're going to negotiate more, and we probably never should have entered a lot of these areas, and that we never should have made a lot of engagements as we did. Going as far as back as the Admiral Byrd's expedition, there was an incident there, and we probably never should have made all these engagements. We should have negotiated more and sent more hailing messages and more time capsules out into space. stating who we were, what our curiosity was as to what was out there, and if they were to approach the planet Earth, they should have just came to one certain particular area, and that's it, and not done anything else.
When you refer to the Admiral Byrd incident, could you be more specific about that?
Well, the matter's still classified, but Admiral Byrd had an expedition. There was an incident, and that's all I'm prepared to say at this time.
Okay. But is that an incident with a slot? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know how it ever was classified as a slot or another life form. The Nordic types.
Yeah.
It's difficult to say exactly what it was classified as, but it was a major incident.
Okay. So now, so so your perception is that the U.S. government is kind of going more into a detente and more of an observation mode and negotiation mode rather than an engagement mode that you had observed earlier with regard to these synthetic quantum environments and the grays when you were in these
That's correct.
negotiations.
I believe the policy has changed, and I believe the policy was changing when I was into the jump rooms. There were attempts to change the policy then, but it just couldn't be done overnight. So it was what they call phase-out, phase-in type policy, and I believe it's working. I believe that is the way to go.
Okay. Now, to your knowledge, were there any policy directives taken or other measures that came out of the expressed concerns of the gray extraterrestrials about the signals of world commercial television regarding drama and theater and comedy?
The Greys specifically mentioned quite a few transmissions specifically, which they had recordings of, which they showed us. On a worldwide scale, that was also an issue. But they determined that we were a major power, and then they determined we...
By we you mean the U.S.?
Yes, we had the most transmissions.
Yeah.
Us and parts of Europe, but then they determined them to, because they were, I don't think they were quite up to speed on World War II or what the aftermath of World War II was. Some of the Nordic types had requested more information about that, and the Greys, during the course of negotiations, were reluctantly asking questions about World War II, but they didn't call it World War II. They asked about these conflicts. Eventually we determined they were talking about World War II and some point after World War II. And we will explain what the world crisis was after World War II, and then what the aftermath of World War II was, and trying to bring them to an understanding about it. And then from there, I'm not sure exactly where they were as far as worldwide transmissions, but they were aware of worldwide transmissions, many of which didn't make sense to them at all, but apparently they were making progress talking to us about the local transmissions in the United States. I think there was some French transmissions and some British transmissions. They noticed us and the British had the same language, and that the French transmissions sometimes had English. So they seemed to think that this was all similar, all connected somehow.
Now, just kind of a sideline, you also mentioned that you communicated at times with them telepathically, but that you requested that they communicate to you verbally. Could you comment on that?
There were telepathic communications from time to time, and they were specifically warned not to communicate with us telepathically. That took a few months for them to comprehend what we were talking about to begin with. And then they thought we were a bit on the disgusting side because we couldn't communicate telepathically. And then we tried to express our concerns about that, and that we were only human beings, that we couldn't deal with this telepathy of theirs. And it took a few months before they came around and agreed that they wouldn't do things like that.
Now, just to get back to the broadcast, did the Greys ever say that they wanted the human race to stop comedy, drama, and that sort of stop comedy and stop drama and stop what?
They really couldn't handle the interpersonal relationships in drama, or comedy, or satire, or the violence, like violent movies, like Western movies, or other violent movies. And they were trying to tell us that we should stop all transmissions worldwide at some point. And then it was very difficult to tell them that that's quite impossible. We couldn't possibly stop all the transmissions. Although they were getting very agitated at some point, insisting that we do, because they're causing a lot of problems in places. Well, apparently they intercepted a lot of these transmissions, interpreted them, disseminated them, and they were wrong. That's what was ultimately going to happen. We didn't know that at the time. We didn't know that that was that serious of a problem. But
so to your knowledge, has this issue of, let's say, a cultural issue, a cultural exopolitical issue, has that been taken up either inside the U.S. government or inside international or broadcasters within the earthly realm?
A lot of disclaimers on a lot of transmissions. You know, it says viewer discretion advised. The preview, the following show contains adult material, not meant for immature audiences. That's not by just the fact that we're mentioning things to ourselves, or to our children, or to young ones. They're mentioning things to people who are listening out in the galactic. And
so you think that the rating system is really also an exopolitical statement?
That's correct.
Is that an intuitive statement, feeling that you have, or do you feel that that comes out of the fact that you were negotiating that system and you watched it develop from that point?
I was not specifically involved in the implementation of what was going to be done, but I do know something was inevitably going to be done, including the posting of a lot of signs, warning signs everywhere. And then eventually we would negotiate with them again that we would try and find some way to explain all these transmissions to them and find a resolution to how best to explain these transmissions and how best to warn any passerbys who are receiving these transmissions not to take them into consideration. But I think what they did on their end was to put a buoy out in space, which flashes all different colors and makes squawks all different kinds of signals, warning all the passerbys about the transmissions from this sector of space, basically, and what not to download them, and to be very mindful of them. And if they already had received transmissions, apparently they established some kind of procedure that they should go through this elaborate message system of theirs and get an update as to what that all meant, that the information was wrong.
Now, one of the critiques of current media is that it's sort of it's the target of what you could call information warfare, such that even movies are information warfare at many different levels, such that, for example, even disclosures about the Project Pegasus or the Mars Jump Room, if they appear in dramas, are attacked through the media. Or there's negative portrayals of extraterrestrials, or that certain vested interests, be it tobacco companies, will advertise cigarettes, or armaments industries will promote war movies, all that kind of thing. And the analysts call that information warfare. So you're actually pushing your product, even though it's supposed to be a comedy or a drama. Were they aware that there's like hidden agendas behind what's on television?
No. This was all one big blur to them. This was interpreted many different ways by them until negotiations commenced, and then they had to reinterpret all the transmissions. Now, the word agenda was used with them, although it doesn't really have a meaning to them. If we tried to explain to them what the word agenda meant and what hidden agenda meant, and it really took a long time for them to understand what we were getting at. They're more of a society that's black and white. A thing either exists or it doesn't. It's either true or it's false. It's either a fact or it's not a fact. There's no gray areas with them. And it was very difficult to mention, like, especially during the commercials or during the movies, someone flashing a product or someone promoting his agenda, as you say, for them to realize that was sort of like incorporated into the movie. That didn't seem to make any bit of sense to them. Or the commercial. The commercials made less sense than the movies. I mean, the commercials really threw them for a loop. They really didn't know what was going on. Because the commercials, at one time, they would switch to the sponsor channel and during the commercial, and that would change nationwide. So everyone had a different sponsor, and the sponsor would have their own little commercial slot, and that wasn't coast to coast at one time. It was a lot of separate different channels. So that really confused them. But they had no understanding in the beginning of an agenda or a hidden agenda at all.
Did they, in the course of your interactions or negotiations, did they mention that how they would begin to implement their desire to upgrade humanity in terms of the galactic standard?
They don't want us transmitting anything. How about that?
But would they
They want us to go to cable TV and not transmit anything. That was their standard, and they insisted upon it.
So did they indicate that they're prepared to intervene to shut down radio and television frequencies and broadcasts in order to accomplish that?
No statement was ever made to that account, to the best of my knowledge.
Did the Greys ever indicate that they had, to use the word, an agenda of any sort of intervention other than giving you, like, the jump room technology or things like that?
They were very subtle about those things. They were not forthcoming. If those negotiations were going on, I wasn't privy to them, and there was things going on I wasn't going to ever be privy to. As far as the word agenda, that's not a good word with them. They really don't see the word as kind of like you're saying, I have the political agenda for next year, what we're going to do. On their scale of thinking, they want you to recite the entire political agenda for next year and the prior year political agendas. And then that would be an understanding with them, word for word, day by day, for as long as it took. So I don't know if that makes sense, As far as any other agendas, hidden or otherwise, we negotiated item by item as best we could.
Now, it just would seem, from a commonsensical point of view, that if an advanced civilization like that are problem solvers throughout the galaxy and galaxies, that they would come across civilizations like ours that are more planetary oriented, oriented toward themselves and not really toward the rest, and, create music and comedy and drama to kind of bide the time instead of solving problems?
That's a good question. They feel we spend too much time not answering our own immediate needs, our own immediate problems like pollution, food shortages, water issues, other problems. Why would you put resources into comedy or satire or the drama or all these recreational activities and not put more resources into more important things like feeding the world hunger issue or the pollution issue, things of that nature?
So they wouldn't understand that there are political forces that, in fact, don't want those problems solved.
Well, I wouldn't quite put it like that, but they just don't understand our system of priorities.
Priorities.
They don't understand that at all.
Funny. What is your sense of where the jump room program currently stands?
I don't know. I haven't voted. I opt out. And if someone is jumping, I don't know about it. And I assume that this whole jump room was being looked back in retrospect. Perhaps we jumped as many places as there is to jump, and there's nowhere else to jump to, or there's nowhere else they will be willing to let us jump to. And that there's really nothing much further that needs to be done except to negotiate at a certain level until we can understand what all these jump rooms are about, and we show them that we understand what they're about and what we need to do to go to the next level. I think they're waiting for a sign from us that we understand what this is all about.
Now, did you, in the course of your negotiations, or rather, what is your opinion if this program were officially revealed? We're revealing it here on Exo University, but if it were officially revealed, look, this is what we've been doing and negotiating with these gray extraterrestrials, what do you think would be the impact? And did you consider that during the course of the program?
I gave my word I wouldn't speak about it. That wasn't forever. Yeah. That you're asking a question what's called the assessment. Yeah. There's a threat assessment, and there's another assessment called the assessment. That has been made since the days of the late 1930s when Douglas MacArthur, General of the Army, was Chief of Staff. I don't know if they called it the assessment then, but they organized an assessment, which is a over 10,000 page across the board view, economically, politically, religiously, like an environmental impact statement worldwide, mainly on domestic issues and military issues. What would happen if ET was to land in Central Park, get out and say, hey, we're your neighbors, this is who we are, this is what we're all about, sort of thing. And it's very elaborate, and apparently there's been a lot of things released on YouTube and in the recent history. So apparently the government is releasing information. I think we're going to take this one step at a time and see what, because according to the assessment, there were parts of civilization that have fallen, like the Catholic Church is changing. and there were parts of civilization that was changed because of disclosures of this magnitude. And as to what impact it is on all aspects of society, that's yet to be proved. But eventually, it will make some kind of change and impact someplace. That's what the assessment's all about.
Finally, we've heard some reports from whistleblowers who have been on quantum access projects of possible use of, for example, teleportation or jump room programs for unauthorized or even criminal piracy purposes, whereby drugs are smuggled via teleportation and money is laundered on a large scale via teleportation. Do you have any comment on this?
I don't know anything about this.
Okay, well, thank you. Bernard Mendez, we want to thank you very much. And we're very happy that you are engaged in these series of classes at Exo University. Thank you.